Hello, welcome back. It is week 51 on Out on That Line. I'm Geoff with my co-host Alex. As always, Alex, how you doing this week?
Ooh, ooh, Geoff, Jesus is a biscuit. Let him sop you up.
Well, that sounded a little weird, but I know why you're saying that. And it's because this week, it's Kanye week with his new album, DONDA. So we're going to be getting to that one. Just a really interesting experience. I'll say that to start with. We'll get into our thoughts a little deeper when we get to that part on the podcast. But I did want to talk about Saturday night. I went and I saw a little band you may have heard of on this podcast named Coheed in Cambria. Mm-hmm. For the first time in, I think, 2.5 years or so. And boy, oh boy, what a show it was. I went with my buddy Andres, who I have gone to a Coheed show before with. We're fellow children amongst the fence, as they say in the Coheed fandom. And that show was absolutely phenomenal. Had a little edible.
Nice.
Beforehand. Got into the show, was feeling great. The Used also played. They were pretty good. I never really listened to the Used.
No, me either.
I didn't really have any sort of basis of what to expect with them, but they put on a really good show. Definitely, fit the bill of they were co-headlining, and I say that in air quotes, but Coheed's closing every single show on this tour. So they're co-headlining, I guess, in name only, because it really was, they were hyping up Coheed when they were getting to their last few songs. They were like, who's ready for Coheed tonight? And the crowd, you could tell, everybody was enjoying the Used, but people were there for Coheed. The Used put on a great show to start, but then Coheed starts out with In Keeping Secrets of Silent Earth.
Ooh.
As their opener. That's usually a middle of the show when everybody's at their peak. So I'm already thinking, this show is going to be balls to the wall. So good. They go from In Keeping Secrets straight into Island. So we are just firing all our guns at once here. I'm like, holy shit, how are they going to keep this up? And they roll through with Shoulders and A Favorite House Atlantic and, just so many hits. The Suffering. I mean, they rip through 12 songs. They get to the encore. And the first one, part of the encore, is Unheavenly Creatures, which is a bop. And then they finished with Welcome Home, as always. So Coheed busts out the double neck Gibson SG guitar. And I start taking a video during the solo. And anybody that's played Rock Band is very familiar with the solo and that song in general. Or if you played, I forget which NHL game it was. I'm sure Tanner can tell us. But just an absolute ripper of a metal song. And so I'm taking this video. The next day I post it on Twitter. And I just say hell of a night with Coheed, something like that. But as of right now, recording on Wednesday night, it's at 40 or 50 retweets, several hundred likes, and over 16,000 views on that video because Coheed retweeted it. And we're like, oh, what kind of phone are you using? It's so clear. And it's literally just the default settings on my iPhone. No free ads or anything like that, but took a pretty kick-ass video. And I'm just riding that high. My favorite band that I just saw that I'm feeling hype on right now. And they retweeted me and got me a lot of traction. So I tried to direct some traffic to the pod. So we'll see how that turns out, what sort of numbers we see from that. But overall, just A+ experience from Claudio and the boys once again.
Nice. And we may have gotten the rub from Coheed and Cambria. Not bad. Not bad at all, Geoff.
Yeah. I could not have scripted the weekend leading into the beginning of this week any better.
Excellent.
Truly a great experience.
Good. This is how many times you've seen Coheed now?
7, I think.
Holy fuck.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, they're good. They're good. I love them.
Yeah, I guess they're okay.
Yeah. I think I'd definitely maybe earned some bonuses for those hardworking families at the Anheuser-Busch brewery up there in St. Louis. Had a few pops.
Yep.
Had a couple joints, was feeling no pain, Jim.
Oh, you mean like the Royal Rumble where you came in every 5 minutes? Every time there was a new entrant in the Rumble, Geoff comes in with 2 beers in his hand.
Well, what can you do? There was no line at that kiosk. I got there a little bit late because I was hanging out with Rory. There was no line at the kiosk. I saw where our seats were. I was like, oh, we're just inside this little this little walkway into the second deck or wherever we were. It's like, let me just grab a couple barley sodas here, you know?
With that proximity,
why don't
you
I grab
can't
a couple
afford not
more?
to. Yeah.
Exactly, you know? And they were the full, like, big 20 ounce or 22 ounce beers, you know? So it was bang for your buck, for like $8 a piece, which at an arena, it's not bad when you're getting that much beer.
Yeah.
Just gonna say. So, you know, with that kind of deal, you can't help but buy a lot of them. It's the fiscally responsible thing to do.
And as people know, we're all about fiscal responsibility on this podcast.
Yeah. It's just a really it was gonna be a bad decision not to do that, you know, and not allow the rest of you to experience me at my peak after like 15 or 16 beers or whatever.
Yeah.
It ended up being that evening.
There were children there that needed to see that. They needed to feel more kinship with the only adult that was cheering for John Cena like they were.
Listen, there was no 5-year-old in that place that was more excited when John Cena won his match than I was.
Correct.
All these little kids thought they were part of C Nation, thought they were little hustlers, but no, me, I'm the guy that popped the hardest for Cena. While you were all sitting there shaking your heads, you bunch of wrestling nerds, I was just having fun. I was just enjoying myself.
Which is so funny because we don't have to get off on a whole tangent, but I've completely given up on wrestling. It's so funny how into it I used to be.
Apparently, AEW just put on one of the best pay-per-views of all time.
That's what I hear. And my two guys were Daniel Bryan and CM Punk, and they both signed with the company, but I can't commit myself to watching every week.
I'm just saying, I think you should give it a shot, because I've enjoyed myself when I go over. Marla's cousins watch a lot of AEW, so when there's pay-per-views, like we'll go over to her cousin Brian's house, shout out Brian, and we'll watch whatever pay-per-view it is. Like we saw, I think it was Double or Nothing, the one they did in Tampa that had like the poker theme or whatever. But that was tons of fun because it was Chris Jericho and his little crew did like a no holds barred like stadium wide match, which was kick ass. Like Urban Meyer threw Chris Jericho a laptop computer because they like busted into his office, and Chris Jericho just smashed it over the other guy's head. I mean, it was just like great theater in wrestling. It was excellent.
Oh, sweet. Well, maybe I'll check one out sometime. Get back to my roots.
Yeah, there you go. You could start a little wrestling podcast with Tanner again.
Oh, yeah. I'm sure that would be a stellar use of both of our time while we're busier than a one-legged man in an ass-kicking contest.
Well, you know, maybe he'll be able to do something he enjoys, you know?
Yeah.
Think of it that way.
Yeah, there you go.
Yeah.
I love you, Tanner.
Well, we have a quick mea culpa to issue. And it was, if you hearken back to our Billie Eilish episode, apparently there was some false information that was spread on the interwebs where she had said that she wished that she grew up poor or something because it would have been easier. Something to that effect. Is that correct? I feel like that's the gist
it was something to that effect. It was like the way it was framed was like false empathy for what the poor go through, yada yada.
Yeah. But so that has since been, like, she didn't retract it because she never said it, apparently. So she didn't have to retract anything. The person that released that information was fact-checked, and that information was found to be incorrect. So us also being incorrect with going off on that, which I don't think we did. You know, I went back and listened to it. You know, I think we were like, she said this thing, but it's like maybe it was a bad thing to say, but like, let's cut her a break because she's so young. So I think we were at least like not super critical of her with something that she didn't end up doing.
No, we didn't hammer her. No, as I recall, we just brought it up as a point of fact at the time. It's germane to the rest of the discussion, but I don't think we fucking shellacked her for it.
Yeah. So, you know, I know Billy listens every week, so Mrs. Eilish want to let you know that we're aware of our mistake, and now we fixed it, so you can continue listening to us without any sort of trepidation.
Yeah, we love you, baby Billy, and thank you to YouTube user VP for checking in with us.
Yes, yeah, thank you. Go make sure that's a good time to bring up the YouTube. You search hashtag out on that line. You'll find all of those singles videos that we like to put out every single week on Thursdays. You'll find all of our podcast episodes. So if you're not already listening on Spotify or Anchor or any of those places where you get your podcasts and you'd rather listen on YouTube, you can do that. by searching hashtag Out on That Line and hitting that subscribe button. We'd really appreciate it because we really we like putting stuff up there. We like interacting with people, and it's exactly situations like this where we probably never would have known that, but a kind user on the internet, they're few and far between these days, showed us the light on this one. So yes, we appreciate that.
Yeah. Go ahead and subscribe. Make Frank Zappa proud. You know, that's my motto.
Yeah. If there's one thing he would have loved about today's day and age, it's YouTube.
Oh, he would have loved YouTube. He would have loved mid-roll ads while you're getting to the good part of a podcast.
Yeah, he would have. Oh, you know what? He would have loved podcasts too.
Oh, he would have.
Absolutely.
He would have been shilling for MeUndies and Cushy Dreams CBD and all of that. Absolutely.
Oh, don't forget Manscaped.
Oh, Zappa was a big fan of shaving his balls.
Yeah.
I read his autobiography. A whole chapter dedicated to making himself smooth as eggs down there.
Yeah, well, I heard he did it with a guitar string. He was just so dedicated.
That's how talented the man was.
Yeah, it's unbelievable.
Yeah.
Truly. Well, what do you say we get into a little Kanye action?
Let's do it. I'm ready.
Okay. So, for those of you who have been living under a rock, Kanye West has come out with a new album called Donda. Now, this was a much anticipated, highly awaited album, and it just released, last week? About a week ago?
Yes. Yep.
Yeah.
August 26th.
Okay, so a little more than, probably like 2 weeks ago at this point. But there were changes. I mean, he was working on this album in Atlanta at the football stadium, like the Mercedes-Benz, like Superdome or whatever. But he lived there and was working on this album, and it was going to be one of those situations, I think, where we had talked about, I think it was SZA, right? That they had to rip her album out of her hands and be like, you're releasing this now.
Yeah.
I don't know who would have that sort of power over Kanye to do that. So I think this was just one of those things where it's like, we're going to wait till he's ready to put this thing out. Otherwise it's never coming out. So he puts it out, and it is not really I guess there's similarities to the more recent Kanye albums. They're certainly more similar to that than College Dropout or Graduation or any of those.
Yeah.
But it really was a interesting experience to get a look inside the mind of Kanye right now. And there's a lot of parts of it still that I'm not sure how I feel about it, but we've got 6 songs that we picked. So I think we're going to be able to get into it a little and try to expound on our feelings on this one a little.
Yeah. And I think to me, it was more interesting. It was more fulfilling as an academic experiment and a look into who Kanye is and where he's at this point than it was necessarily musically enjoyable. That's not to say that there weren't songs I really liked, but this is a really messy album. And that's not necessarily a negative thing. It's really messy. Sloppy would be negative. Messy, I think, it's a byproduct of his thought processes. He contradicts himself a lot. He goes on a lot of tangents, but that is a byproduct of mental illness, of bipolar disorder. So it's oftentimes hard to follow, oftentimes really rewarding. But like I said, academically more interesting. And in terms of the sound, it's kind of a combination of everything from My Beautiful Dark Twisted Fantasy on. And it specifically has a lot in common with Life of Pablo, because once that was released, he kept tinkering. And he's continued to tinker with this. Not too much more, but Jail Part 2 was not available because DaBaby's manager didn't want it out there. So it was still in flux after it was released. It's an interesting release strategy, but it's probably the most Kanye way to do it.
Yeah, it reminds me of a lot of times the way they release video games now, where it's they release the game mostly finished. And if folks are familiar with Cyberpunk 2077, that game was horrendous when it first released, and then they released patches to fix it. I feel like that's what Kanye is going to consistently do throughout the rest of his career, because the way that you can instantaneously upload something to Spotify, I guess whenever it jumps through the hoops it needs to get verified as his, or whatever needs to happen for that, but he can just keep releasing updates to this album in perpetuity. if he feels like it. The way that music is released nowadays. And I wonder if this is something other people are going to do, because he's always been a trendsetter. We wouldn't have all of the Lil Babies, and we wouldn't have like Kid Cudi in his form nowadays if it wasn't for Kanye in the first place. There's a very distinct line. It's like where Kanye started, and then when he was really a true like hip hop artist, and then he got into with Graduation, starting to get into a little more like the singing and the R&B and stuff. And then when like 808s and Heartbreaks and My Beautiful Dark Twisted Fantasy came out, we got a whole brand new Kanye, where he had kind of been tinkering with himself, and then all of a sudden we got this My Beautiful Dark Twisted Fantasy, I don't know if anybody's going to disagree with you when you say it's a classic album. It's that good. It's a really, really excellent album. Might be his best album.
It's my favorite Kanye album.
Yeah, there's an argument that it's his best album. But I think you're right when you say that this has a lot in common with that all the way through Life of Pablo. And I guess it does through like Ye as well.
Through Jesus is King. That was a Christian album. So
yeah. And there's definitely a lot of Christianity on this album, but there's also a lot of like questioning it and like, challenging his belief system a little bit, which I think is good, because he was in danger of kind of becoming like a little bit of a religious weirdo. It's like people that are totally dedicated to that without questioning at all worry me a little bit. And I think with this album, a lot of that worry about Kanye particularly is alleviated here.
Yeah, I think he's a guy who dabbles in a lot of different things. He dabbled in, if you want to call it, Trumpism. He was a big Trump guy for a while. He has since disavowed that whole thing. I don't think he necessarily, I don't want to speak for him, but the impression that I get is he doesn't necessarily regret the time spent kind of cozying up to Trump, because there were ulterior motives, is kind of a shady way to say it, but there was something he and Kim Kardashian were trying to do with clemency for prisoners, especially nonviolent drug offenders. So it's, people were obviously very upset by the whole situation, but he has since extricated himself from the MAGA movement. Before we jump into the album, I kind of want to talk about Kanye, the person.
Mm-hmm.
Specifically, this idea that like he, in terms of public perception, is kind of a holy trinity of his own. People tend to look at him three ways: Kanye the tortured genius, Kanye the asshole, Kanye the mental illness sufferer.
Mm-hmm.
And I think somewhere in there's a combination of all three that is what makes him so interesting. But certain people are so paradigmatic that he can only be one to them.
Yeah.
And I think that's interesting. So I'm curious what your impressions are of Kanye West.
I think, to me, mix between tortured genius and asshole.
Okay.
Yeah. And I think, I do think the mental illness side plays a huge part in both. But to me, like when I look at Kanye, the things that I see are like, he'll say something in the media that I'm like, oh man, that was kind of a shitty thing to say. Or like when he was in the MAGA stuff, I'm like, what an idiot, but I've always enjoyed his music. There's very little of his music that I straight up didn't like.
Mm-hmm.
Jesus is King as an album, I was like not that interested in it. Ye was all right. Life of Pablo was awesome. I really liked that album, and I liked everything before that too. So, to me, I've always felt like Kanye was, there's a reason for everything he did, that even though he had some mental issues and stuff, which I think got exacerbated by just being part of the Kardashian atmosphere. I think that is a problem for someone that values the right to spend his time how he chooses to in a environment where that's not encouraged. Mm-hmm. They were a reality TV show family for over 10 years. It's just, that's got to be a very difficult thing to be a part of when you're trying to deal with your own inner demons, and everything revolves around how is this going to look in front of a camera, and like there's just that added pressure. And I don't think he doesn't like the spotlight. I think Kanye loves the spotlight, but on his terms. When he's getting told what to do and how to do it, or you can't say that, or when he's getting put into mental institutions and like the Kardashians are making statements on his behalf about his mental state, I think at that point, that was the breaking point for him, and that was where he figured out, he's like, okay, well, I'm never going to get better if I try to do it here, so he, broke that off, whichever way it went, that ended. But I think that had a huge part in how he has been acting the last decade, when everyone's like, oh, Kanye is such a dick and blah, blah, blah. When it started to leave the he's a genius conversation and start to go equally into he's an asshole. And then you find out about the mental illness. So people split off into that camp too. But it's like the focus became less about his music. And I think a lot of it had to do with the fact that he was a clothing designer now. He was part of the Kardashian clan. And it just like, I don't think that any of that really fit him. I think the clothing brand does, but the Kardashian part just doesn't fit who I've always thought Kanye to be.
Mm-hmm. And I honestly think it started way before that, when his mom died.
Mm-hmm.
Donda, who the album is named for, Donda West. She was his anchor. She tethered him to reality. And I think he obviously was innately bipolar, and it was going to rear its head at some point. But with Donda around to influence him, it probably would have been very different. And I also don't necessarily want to lay all of the Kardashian drama at Kim's feet, because by all accounts, I'm not sitting here being like, she's the greatest person that ever lived. But by all accounts, she's a little more sensitive and empathetic than she gets credit for. I think her mom really is the root of all evil in that thing. Kris Jenner as a momager is just one of the dirt worst people on the planet. I think she doesn't care how many necks she has to step on to get another revenue stream. Monetizing Kylie, is that the one that shit out a kid with Travis Scott?
Yep.
Or Tyga? I don't even fucking know. But Kris Jenner is fucking evil incarnate. I think Kim Kardashian has displayed a little more empathy towards Kanye than she might get credit for.
Yeah.
And then for me, this whole approach, this idea of like, oh, he's a tortured genius. I think he is, but I think the misnomer is, okay, well, he's a tortured genius because he's bipolar. A lot of people just, I mean, like my own father, I'm bipolar. So my dad is like, oh, well, you're a writer and you're bipolar. And I think those things, creativity and mental illness go hand in hand. And I'm reminded of a quotation from David Lynch, where he said, a lot of people think Van Gogh was great at what he did because he was mentally ill. But I would argue that his art brought him the only happiness that he knew. His art was not him sublimating mental illness. It was an escape from everything else going on in his head. And I think that is 100% true with Kanye West. I think he's expressing all of these things that he's feeling. I mean, Donda start to finish is a journey through where he's been to what his current state of mind is to where he fears this is going to go. He famously lit himself on fire at the third Donda event. He built a replica of his childhood home at this event. He staged a second wedding to Kim Kardashian at this event. So this is Kanye like reliving all of the big beats in his life. And I mean, credit to the guy who turns his entire life into an art installation. It's pretty fucking wild. So whatever you think of this album, whatever you think of Kanye as a person, his talent and his intuition as an artist is undeniable to me.
Yes. I do think it would be irresponsible for us to not mention, with all of the kind of, expectations we have of Kanye as a great artist. There are some of those drawbacks, like him bringing in Marilyn Manson and DaBaby into the mix on this album. DaBaby, I think a little less of an offense. Marilyn Manson has some very credible accusations against him. Some very credible, terrible sexual assault and abuse allegations against him. And, those things haven't been cleared. As far as I know, there's more and more stories that keep coming out about it. So to bring him in as some sort of statement against being canceled, to me, I think is a pretty irresponsible move. DaBaby, less so, but still, it's like, why? I realize that, maybe after a certain amount of time, if he puts in the work and does all these things, like what DaBaby said was terrible. There's no question about that. Like what DaBaby did was not great. I guess he didn't like physically abuse somebody or like Marilyn Manson did, but just it wasn't good to have, I think, either one of them brought in for the reason that he brought them in was some sort of statement about cancellation. So I just want to get that out of the way and just be like, that was a little weird that he did that. Hopefully he it's like the MAGA thing where he realizes that wasn't a good thing to do. But overall, at least they didn't like influence the album in a big way, which is nice.
Yeah, for sure. And I mean, it goes along with things like when he said slavery was a choice, and then he had to walk that back and explain what he really meant, because he's a guy that, God forgive me for invoking the name of Joe Rogan, but when Kanye was on Joe Rogan, he talked about how ideas just shoot through him faster than he can process them, so sometimes his math gets him into trouble. So again, mental illness, genius artistry, none of that is an excuse for having especially Marilyn Manson, and I would go further and say DaBaby. DaBaby's a fucking asshole. Yeah. None of that's an excuse to have them on there as any kind of social commentary. But we're also not reviewing the song they were involved in, so fuck them both.
Yeah, fuck them both. Well, what do you say we get into the actual songs on this one? So we've chosen 6. It was a long album. This is almost a 2-hour album. So narrowing it down to 6, we might talk about some things we didn't like, some things we really liked, but there's a lot of content on this album. So I'm going to preemptively say stream this one because, there's no chance we're going to cover the whole thing. We're going to do our best with the songs that we chose that we feel like we can do the most, kind of accurate commentary from our personal perspectives. But there is a lot of meat on this bone, a lot of meat. We're not going to be able to eat all of it. So go listen to this album and let us know what you think about it as, after the show, after you listen to this. I think it'd be very interesting to hear some different perspectives, and especially from some folks that maybe had a different opinion of Kanye before this one than we did. I think we both were expecting him to make a good album. Maybe if you weren't expecting this to be a good album and you got your prediction confirmed by however you felt about it, let us know. This is one of those albums that I think has been one of the most controversial releases of the year, just with how much anticipation there was, how much controversy there's just around Kanye all the time. It was one of the most anticipated, and I think at this point, one of the more important releases of the year that we've seen so far.
Yeah, I would agree. I mean, it blew Sour out of the water with the first day streams by 100 million streams. Fucking wild.
Yeah, that ain't nothing. 100 million streams that's almost a third of the population of this country.
Yeah, pretty fucking wild.
That's a lot. So the first song we picked is one he did with, surprisingly enough, Jay-Z. They had some issues, previous to this. So, I think a lot of this album was, like you were saying, it was Kanye trying to make amends not only with himself, but with some other people maybe that he had an issue with. Didn't get his issues sorted out with Soulja Boy, but that's a story for another day.
Or Drake.
Or Drake. Yeah, that's another thing too, is this album was released on purpose at the time that it was, because he knew that Drake's album was coming down the pipe and he wanted his horse to get out of that gate first. Yep. And have you listened to the Drake album?
I have not yet.
It's just more Drake.
Of course it is.
Not, yeah, like this see, that's the difference for me. It's like people think they're in competition. I don't think they're doing the same things here. I don't think Kanye is going for radio bangers here. He's not looking to be played in clubs. Like Kanye wants 20 years from now for us not to think of him as a novelty. As he wants us to think of him on the same level that we think of like a Marvin Gaye or somebody like that. That's like an artiste, Yeah. And I don't think Drake's going down in that category. His music's very popular, going to probably stay very popular forever, but they're very, very different kind of artists.
Yeah. And a real quick aside, I'm not even doing my bit when I say I kind of consider Kanye another Frank Zappa, doing very different things in different genres, but it's that same kind of unbridled search for truth in the work. And I think the broad experimentation and stuff like that, it's very Zappa-esque. Obviously, he's the first Kanye. He's not the new Zappa, but I very much kind of hold them in the same category.
Yeah, that's fair. That's absolutely fair. Because I think, musically, I don't know who you compare Kanye to. Musically, I don't know who you compare Frank Zappa to. It's just like, but personality wise and just the drive that they have to create something great. That's that they have in common.
Yep.
Where I think I don't know if they'd like each other, but they would probably, but God damn it, they'd respect each other.
Oh, I would love to see that. The collab will never get.
So the first one that we're going to talk about, and after we got off on another tangent here, that's just what this album does. Is Jail featuring Jay-Z. Now this is the third song on the album, I think, something like that. Hold on, a second song on the album. So it's really gets you into it, and you realize you see Jay-Z is on this one, so you're like, oh, this is going to be interesting. Gotta say, Jay-Z's verse on this one, like one of the worst of all time.
Oh, it's horrible.
Absolute dog shit. I don't know what he was doing. But that aside, this song, like the beat and everything, just was so good on this one. Just like this was as good as anything on Life of Pablo. And other than the Jay-Z verse, which I'm perfectly happy to ignore for the rest of this song, it was great.
Well, legend has it that Jay-Z recorded his verse fucking 4 hours before the first DONDA listening event. And it definitely, from the way it sounds, I fucking buy that for $1.
Yeah.
It sounds like shit.
For sure.
It's lazy. It's tossed off. It's bad. I think as symbolism in terms of, the throne, Kanye and Jay-Z, reconciling, especially on the first song of the album, it makes a strong statement to be like, see, I squashed my beef with Jay-Z, and this is going to be a story of redemption and battling my own iniquities and reflecting on my sins and transgressions and kind of appealing to my current state of mind. So functioning, again, this album is oftentimes more interesting academically than it is musically. And this is one of those moments because musically that verse sucks my balls. It's terrible. But I think what I like about this song is this concept of the dark night in faith, which is this idea that you're going through the worst and most hellish period of your life, but God is with you. So there will be an ascent. He's just letting you struggle right now. So it's not ever utter hopelessness from Kanye. And anytime that does rear his head, he kind of backs back into his faith. So I thought that was an interesting concept that runs throughout this, the dark night in faith.
Yes. And I will say the one line from Jay-Z on this one, Hova and Jesus, like Moses and Jesus. I thought that was great. I thought that was a good one. Because Kanye probably heard that line. He's like, oh my God, it's so good. He's comparing me to Jesus.
Well, that's another thing that Kanye does a lot on this album is like, for a very religious guy, it borders on blaspheme because he, I think sometimes is more interested in Christianity for the fact that he sees himself as a Christ figure than he is necessarily devout. And I don't want to impugn his religion, whatever it means to him. I don't want to say he's not the real deal. I just get the impression sometimes that he gets a little carried away. And I don't even mean this as a criticism, but his mind kind of likes to get carried away with this idea that he's a Christ figure and he's suffering for us and specifically for his black fans. Yeah.
And, he says, and it goes to go into the rest of the album with the line, guess who's going to jail tonight? God gonna post my bail tonight. And I think that's him acknowledging he's like, I'm going to fuck up. But as long as I believe and I have faith in God and Jesus, that I'm going to get through it. And I think that's what he's saying with that one because he knows he's about to go through it on this album. And he's about to dredge up some demons. He's about to open those closet doors and let us all see the skeletons. Because one thing that I think Kanye, you can never, ever knock him about is he's not a liar. He's not going to hide how he feels about anything. And that includes in his music or in interviews, whatever it might be. He is going to tell you what he feels. And, he's a fellow Taylor Swift hater, which I can absolutely appreciate, just a ride or die kind of guy when it comes to that life. So I can really appreciate that one. And it really gets you into the rest of the album. But we're going to skip quite a few songs here before we get to your first pick, called Moon with Kid Cudi.
Yeah, so this one went through a lot of changes. It was originally just an interlude with vocals by Don Toliver. And then the second incarnation, Kid Cudi was added to the mix. He's obviously got his trilogy of albums, and uses a lot of moon imagery in his work as well. And I think, especially in this song, the moon is isolation. The moon is a lonely place. It's a place where you can float above everything and observe the world below without being influenced by it. And on this album full of really heavy, gothic, dark, Christian imagery throughout, it's not a Christian contemporary album like Jesus is King, but it really obviously leans into that religious imagery. But Moon kind of abandons that theme to just have this quiet moment to just hover above everything and take a minute to observe and take a breath. And in that way, it still kind of functions like an interlude. But it's great. It's got this really small, mournful, hopeless kind of cry of a sound. And I think it's a great moment of introspection on this album. That's a lot of stream of consciousness. This is one of the more thoughtful songs.
Yes. And I think Kid Cudi was the perfect pick to be on this song. The man on the moon himself, and I think that's because they did the Kids See Ghosts,
which I really enjoyed.
It was a pretty good album. And it's just, I think Kid Cudi kind of got a bad rap for a while. I don't know, for whatever reason, but people kind of like started thinking he was lame for a little while, but he just kept pumping out music. He just stayed true to who he was. And I think he's always stayed true to Kanye too. I think through it all, I think they've always been like friends before they were collaborators. They've always had respect for each other as people. And so the things that they've done together, I feel like Kid Cudi understands Kanye as well as anybody. He understands what he's looking for. And so he's like, he brought me here for a reason. I'm going to find out what that reason is. And I'm going to make this song because I feel like this is the song that I need to participate in. And I think that's exactly what Kanye brought him in for. And I think it's perfect as it is. I think it functions perfectly for what it is in this album.
Yeah, and that's why I wanted to shout it out, is it's just this really nice kind of tender moment. Other people might find more important songs on the album depending on where their sensibilities lie. But this one was important to me because it was that contrast. It showed a lot of self-awareness and a lot of artistry in how minimalist it was. Because you can call this a maximalist album because so many fucking production elements get thrown in a lot of the time. But it's also fairly minimalist. And this is one of those moments where less is more. And I appreciate that diversity within the work.
Yes. Yeah. It's just a very, very musically soothing song. It was a very, very nice part of this album.
Yeah.
Before we get into Heaven and Hell. Now I wrote on my notes, I was like, the old Kanye ? Because, he actually gets into some really, classic Kanye hip hop verses on this one. And I think it's not as good as, some of the stuff he did on like Graduation or College Dropout. I think there's a certain amount of anger he had back then. It's like, I think with all artists, you have a little bit more of an edge, and that edge slowly gets dulled as you go on. You have to find a new way to make your cuts, and I think where he may not have the capabilities that he used to, like, it's still some pretty strong, just classic hip hop verses on this one.
Yeah. And this one is interesting too, because it reminded me a lot of something that he said on Kimmel once, where he believes that we are living inside of a simulation. And we are all, I think he said actors rather than robots or anything like that. And that's a big part of bipolar disorder, is psychosis and paranoia. And you can say that is where the simulation theory came from, or he saw that theory because he's not the one to come up with it. He saw it while he was in a manic state and kind of adopted it. I don't know how he feels about it today. Kanye changes his mind all the time, twice a day. But it's interesting because that felt like the approach to this song was that he had this weird distance from existence and humanity, where he really was looking at it like a simulation that he knows he's powerless within. We all are. We don't know who's controlling it or why. His interpretation is God is in charge of the simulation. Or God exists within the fucking simulation. Who knows? And he kind of fit all of that into, like you said, a very traditional hip-hop song that's just like loaded with that Christ figure imagery again.
Yeah, I mean, he says, "Know the Lord, my bulletproof vest." You know, so he's actively, claiming, Jesus and God and his religion as a shield. And I don't think he's saying that he's like, oh, I can say whatever I want and I'm immune. I think he's looking at it like I can be who I need to be, and I have this shield to protect me from anybody stopping me from being that. And I think that's, when you think of things that way, it becomes like a unhealthy. It goes from being an unhealthy thing to, maybe he's not where he needs to be, but at least he's walking a good, well-lit path to get there. And I think he's not doing anything unhealthy. Like, if this is the catalyst, if his religion is the catalyst he needs to get where he wants to go, then more power to him. And I think he may skew a little bit, like you were saying, towards viewing himself as a Christ figure, but I think that's what makes him a great artist, is not his mental illness, it's his ego. It's his confidence that he is capable of creating something great. And I think that goes hand in hand with the religion thing, where it's like, well, if I'm going to be part of this, I'm going to be the leader. And I think that's where he kind of gets that idea from, but it never comes across to me as like, I don't know, it's not that serious to me.
Yeah, and I don't think that any of the Christ figure stuff comes from a place of psychosis. I think, like you said, it comes from ego and a genuine interest in that idea. I mean, those are interesting characters to write about in any medium, in song or film or television. And I think it's just something he's attracted to, is the idea that your suffering has to mean something. And this is how he chooses to make sense of it.
Yes. And we got another good one with Jesus Lord. I'm glad you picked this song.
Whew. Fuck me. I have almost a page of notes on this, and we don't have to use all of them, obviously. But this feels like it's between this and one of my other picks, Come to Life, where it feels like the most real, raw, exposed nerve Kanye that we get, because it starts off, this is all over the place. You can't say this song is about one thing, and it almost does feel like prayer that he put to pen and paper and then recorded. Like, this is something that came to him in his private time, and now we get to see it, because he's upset with the criticism he's fielded. He wants to please people. He wants people to like him. I think, there's a danger in the artist playing to the gallery, as David Bowie would say. And that's not what Kanye does, but you want your stuff to be appreciated. And some people are never pleased. Donda didn't come out on the schedule that was promised, and people got pissed. There are people that wanted this album to be a flop. There are people that are mad that he doesn't take psychiatric drugs because they don't work for him. A big concern is that, yes, they probably might give him a better quality of life, but they may also blunt his creativity. That's a real concern, depending on what you're taking. So this is a song where, like, all of those thoughts are just kind of swirling at him and making him feel disconnected from all of his experiences. And he kind of ventures into suicidal ideation. But one of the things about suicide that a lot of people come to is, oh, it's such a selfish act. Think about all the people you're hurting. Think about the people you leave behind. Think about what it's doing to them. Never mind what you're going through. Never mind, I'm not advocating suicide. Yeah. If you feel that way, get help. Caveat applies. But this idea that it's an inherently selfish, hurtful act, I think weighs on him, as it does anybody who gets boxed in like that. And this is the point where he starts to explore an idea through this song, which is generational suffering and the cycle of vengeance, and how pain begets more pain, and it changes everything. It's the butterfly effect. He loses his mom and it changes his entire life. And he imagines other families and what they go through. A mom who loses a child, so she becomes drug addicted, can't take care of her other child, who gets pregnant, who can't raise this child, and the dad's not around, and this other brother goes off for vengeance against the people who killed his brother. And like, it's this really elaborate story that he tells throughout this, seemingly out of nowhere, because he's trying to talk about what the Buddhists call samsara, that cycle of suffering, to make sense of it all, to figure out why it matters and why it's such a pervasive influence in our lives.
Yeah. And let me just say, this song is substantial. Lyrically substantial. I mean, I think it's like 32 bars or something like that, which is like double what any other verse normally is. Or like when someone gets asked to do like a feature or something, I think it's normally like 16 bars or something like that. But this is like 32 or maybe even like 48. I mean, it's a lot. It's a long, long verse on this one. And he tells that whole story, you know, and I think it's just like, this is one of those things where you mentioned before, he gets these ideas and they just shoot through him, you know, where he can't really stop him. I think that's what happened with a verse like this, is like, he kept realizing he had more of the story to tell, that he's like, how else did this affect this person? Okay, well, now they're involved. Now I got to get them a little more into this story, you know? And I think it was just a really excellent story to hear. Well, I mean, it was excellently written, not an excellent story to hear, because it does not have a happy ending, as you wouldn't expect that it would. But it definitely has that, you know, those thoughts of like, well, you know, things are so bad down here, you know, it makes you wonder what's up there.
Yeah.
You know, and then you realize that you've never been allowed upstairs, you know, and the way he puts that together makes you feel like you're in this house, but he's really talking about like life and spirituality and, you know, kind of this social construct of the world, where it's like you get stuck in this one area, you're not given opportunities to move up, you know? So it's like, what do? You wonder constantly what's out there. And, you know, it's just going through those like very spiritual kind of big existential questions, while also telling this very real life story, you know, and just mixing those two things together, I thought was genius. I thought was one of the most genius moves that he made on this entire album, was how he put that verse together. And not even to mention Jay Electronica's verse on this one, which was also excellent. I mean, just the depth of knowledge that I think Jay Electronica has of, you know, he doesn't strike me as in this, you know, the same way Kanye does. It seems like he's talking about this as like from a history book, you know, versus it being like his spirituality and his religion. He's dropping names like Thelonious and Panonica. And he even says, like, one of the funniest parts was he says, is Jay Elec Entendronica, because he's making all these like allegories and entendres and stuff like that it's like, it's just a really genius verse. And I think it gets lost in the mix a little bit, even though it's that good, because Kanye's was just incredible, was some of the best work he's done in years.
Yeah, and the other thing with Kanye, and this comes up a lot in the album and in interviews about the album, he spends a lot of time imagining himself as other people. Particularly relevant to this song, especially the outro, he talks about a guy named Larry Hoover Sr., who was a notorious gang leader who is incarcerated for conspiracy, racketeering, drug charges, murder, all of that kind of stuff. And Kanye has been very vocal, or he was around 2018, very vocal in trying to get clemency for this guy, despite the horrible things that he perpetrated. And he explained it as, well, in another lifetime, I think I was this guy. And you see that in this song. Kanye West was an only child who grew up decidedly middle class. Motherfucker lived in China when he was 10 for like 2 years. So he's had a very interesting, unique life experience, but he's so creative that he's able to look at the suffering around him and extrapolate this narrative of what could have happened just by a little cosmic flip of the coin if I had been born into a world that is just this cycle of vengeance and suffering, and the people you love are taken from you. And it's a, more than anything, this song is a dazzling display of empathy. The fact that he can have empathy for a guy like Larry Hoover, who in the research that I did, seems like a pretty bad guy. Someone feel free to fact check me on that. Seems like a pretty unsavory guy, but Kanye somehow found empathy for him. And
Yeah.
you can say, like, well, through the lens of psychosis or mental illness, but I don't even look at it that way, because I think he just has an ability to place himself into the interior lives of other people and imagine their pain. And I don't think there are a lot of celebrities or artists who can do that.
No, no. And I think the reason he has become what he is, and he's got this status where it's like he was just one of the good hip hop artists back when he had like Graduation and College Dropout and those early albums, but he has morphed into something completely different, in recent, like it seems like every single album he's reaching further and further and further, trying to find something more, on a lot of it, he's had a lot of success. On some of it, he's missed a little bit, but on this one, he definitely hit. And, this song in particular, Jesus Lord, I don't know if there's a better song on the album, at least lyrically. I think this is the one for me when I think about like Kanye at his best these days. This is the kind of stuff that I would point people to.
Yeah, agreed. Yep.
Yeah. The next one was one of my picks, Pure Souls. And I really like the line in this one, the truth is what you get away with. And it really is such an interesting line, because you think about all the things, and I immediately like kind of drew a straight line from that line to politics and just what people get away with. What Andrew Cuomo got away with for so long until his house of cards finally came crashing down. But he almost made it through all that unscathed, and so when the history books get written on a situation like that, the controversies aren't going to really get mentioned unless you really dig in and do some research. Like if they're doing just a cursory, here's the major bullet points of what happened in politics in this area, like it's going to say Andrew Cuomo was governor during COVID and was governor throughout COVID, and it's like you're going to get this much more rosy picture of him than what actually happened. And I think when they say a line, the truth is only what you get away with, it's like you either can skate through those things and you get lucky, or it catches up to you. So it's like as if you get away with it and you get through it all, the truth becomes whatever you want it to be, because you made it through. The victors are the ones that write the history books. And that's kind of what I got from this one.
Yeah, and we're living in an age where it's never been easier to control your own narrative. Mm-hmm. You get to present whatever you want to be, however you want to feel, how much anonymity you want to use, how much of yourself you want to put into a brand. Like, it has never been easier to control your own narrative and control your own truth. What's our favorite 12-letter dirty word? Authenticity. Mm-hmm. And that's what this song is about. Pure souls. I would consider Kanye pure soul. It's like you said before, you can never accuse him of selling out and showing his ass and doing something that he doesn't want to do or doesn't believe in. And that's truth to him, is living unfiltered. It's not cultivating truth. It's not cultivating reality. You can argue that reality for him might be subjective, again, through the lens of mania and psychosis and paranoia that all comes with that. Not to say like every day of his life he's completely dysfunctional. I certainly, of all people, don't want to chalk it up to that, because that's a negative stigma. But when it does hit you, it fucking hits you. The fact that he can cut through something like that, like we all saw that viral moment where he talked about he wanted Kim to abort North. Yeah. He was screaming about, like, I almost killed my child, like, not in control of himself in that moment. Everything coming out in a manic episode. The fact that he can experience that, and then these intense moments of clarity where he can put his authenticity on display, that's a feat.
There were some spots on this album where I just didn't really have any feelings towards it, really. I don't think there's really anything I actively didn't like on the album, but this was one of those songs where I was like, and I thought Roddy Ricch did a really good job on this one too. I never really listened to him, but it was really interesting hearing his verses. And I think they all understood, except for maybe Jay-Z, they all understood why they were there. They all understood what the purpose was was that this wasn't about any of them. This was about finding something great to be a part of. And Kanye was inviting them in to be part of that. And I think a lot of them took it very seriously and put in some really good work. And I think Jay Electronica was excellent. Roddy Ricch was excellent. Kid Cudi was excellent on his part. It's just, I feel like this was one of those moments that, we're going to look back on probably. And this might be an album where we look back on it and it's even better than we thought it was at first. Where we look back on what happens after it and allows us to put a little more context around this one. And maybe this turns out to be one of his best, just with a little more hindsight. Who knows?
Yeah. And to bring it all home to that end, you've got Come to Life, which was my last pick.
Mm-hmm.
And I think for me, it's all encapsulated in the line, ever wish you had another life? And this transcends the idea of the gilded cage. I don't think he thinks he's a prisoner of his wealth. I think that is one infinitesimal aspect of what his life is and what it means to be Kanye, because there are the mistakes he's made. There is his mental illness. There's his fame. There are his children. There are his brands. There's his wife, his marriage falling apart. This idea that, I think Kim Kardashian said it. She's like, we work better when we're apart. How fucked up is that? And he says it in the song. Every time she's here, I want her to go away. Every time she's gone, I miss her. Back and forth, mad and sad. And it's this, oh, Henry, gift of the Magi thing. Like, you can't ever have it. You can't ever, you're trapped between the worlds. And they share children. And he wants to give his children the world, to the point where, he's got an exclusive deal with Adidas, but North says she wants Nikes. He's like, fuck it. I don't care about brand loyalty. I don't care about money. I don't care about ego. You get what you want. I love my kids. And this is an important song in the Kanye canon, because he's vulnerable to a point. But every time he really kind of starts to doubt himself in this, and he starts to get very vulnerable, it's almost like we talked about with Lord last week. He touches on a certain level of vulnerability, but as soon as he hits it, he kind of falls back into like, but Jesus is my co-pilot. He's got my back. I'm going to be okay. And it's interesting to watch. And again, authenticity. He didn't doctor it. He let us see the thought process. And I think that is really, really important, because like we talked about at the beginning, DONDA's an event. That's why he had 3 listening events. There's why there's a visual component. This is letting us know where he's at, and this is a crossroads for him. I don't want to be a doomsayer, but who fucking knows what could come out of this with what's happened in his life. And I hope it's good things. I hope this is a crossroads for the positive, but this was a polarizing album, and I hope the criticisms people have that are based in good faith he can take as an artist, and I hope that he can parse through the ones that are born out of jealousy and hatred and superficial reasons.
Yeah. And I do think that, because I've been seeing some and I pay attention to a few like music reviewers, and they all have said the same kind of things I was expecting them to say, which is that, there's some parts of this that are just like kind of off the wall, where you wonder, how mentally there was he when he was doing this stuff. But there's some points, like you mentioned, those moments of clarity that pepper this album, that really, it's like you're in the fog, and then all of a sudden, the wind and the sun pushes all the fog away, and you can see clearly to the sky above. It's like, that's the kind of feeling I get when I listen to Kanye sometimes, because there's so much that goes along with it. There's so much about his personality and the things that he's done in public outside of music and all that. Like, all of that is part of him. So when you listen to his music, he's so, he doesn't hide anything. So all of that comes through in his music too. And, once in a while you get these moments, and there were several moments on this album where it's just like, damn, there's a reason he's at the stature that he is. There's a reason people cared about this album in the first place, was because he's capable of doing stuff like this, like in Jesus Lord and Moon. It's like, those are things that other artists just can't or won't do. And the fact that he gets compared to, and everybody's like thinking it's this Drake versus Kanye thing, I just don't agree with that, because to me, they're just completely separate. Drake has a lot of songs that I like. I don't hate Drake by any means, but I'm not generally going out of my way to listen to his albums. I've looked forward to and digested every single one of Kanye's albums since the first time I heard College Dropout. Every single time it's come out, I either went out and bought it because streaming didn't really exist yet, or I streamed it immediately in the recent decade or whatever, I guess. But I'm going to say stream it on this album. You can all draw your own conclusions. But I think a lot of you are going to land where we did, where it's like there's some moments on this where, it was like not as good as you were hoping it was going to be. But there was a lot of moments where you're like, damn, this is why we were looking forward to it.
Yeah, there are some obvious stutter steps here and there. There are some moments that are going to expose assholes that wanted Kanye to fail. And there are moments where pretentious people will be exposed. Like anyone that tells you that like, oh, Donda Chan is so brilliant, go fuck yourself. Like that's such a like hipster thing. Speaking as someone who loves Trout Mask Replica and Captain Beefheart, but can academically justify it, these motherfuckers that are like, Donda Chan, so powerful and elegant in its simplicity. It's like, come the fuck on. I buy that argument for Moon. Yeah. But there were enough stutter steps on this, but nothing that would tank the album, because again, I maintain that it's an experience more than it is just, pop this on in the car while we go get Froyo.
Yeah.
This is something you kind of have to sit and digest. It's almost kind of like Mass, to carry his own religious symbolism through to the end. I love Kanye. He could make 7 straight albums of crap. He's one person I won't stop listening to, no matter how many times you get burned. He's just potentially the most interesting artist we have right now, making stuff, and you never know what's going to come out. You can't say that this was not a tremendous effort, and you can't say that this was bad. It's uneven, it's messy, it's chaotic, but it's motherfucking interesting. So I will also say stream it.
Yes, excellent. So that wraps it up for this album. So we have to run through our housekeeping items here. So go find us on Instagram, @Out on That Line. Go find us on Twitter, @Out on That Line 1. You find us through email, outonthatline@gmail.com. As I mentioned before, find us on YouTube, #OutOnThatLine. There'll be another singles video for you. If you haven't already listened to that singles video that comes out on Thursdays, if you haven't listened to that on Monday, go and listen to it on YouTube. Get those views up, folks. Maybe you'll find something that you didn't know you were gonna like. There's gonna be, I think that's number 30 coming out for the singles videos, right?
Sure is.
Yeah, 30 singles videos, 51 regular tracks, a few one-off tracks. So there is tons of content. We're coming up on 100 pieces of content in pretty short order here. So now's still a good time to get in there, folks. Get in there, subscribe so you can keep up with everything. We'd love to hear from you. Let us know what you want to hear. Let us know what albums are coming out that you're excited about so we can start getting excited about them too. And we'll look forward to Casey Musgraves coming up pretty soon. Strand of Oaks coming up pretty soon. I'm sure there's several others that I'm forgetting about right now. But yeah, we got some strong weeks ahead of us here, my friend.
We absolutely do. And I'm keen as a motherfucking bean.
Yes, and we'd love to have you all along with us. So make sure you go subscribe, go follow us on all those channels. And until next time.